This debate is hosted by Bellona, and it's focused on a renovation wave and its role towards a greener construction sector in Europe. My name is Luise Fischer. I work for EIT Climate Kick, an organization that is founded and largely funded by the European Institute for Innovation and Technology, and I'm the moderator of today's session. I have guests with me, you can see on the screen. I would briefly like to introduce them to you. Ms. Fulvia Raffaelli is the head of Unit C1, Circular Economy and Construction, in the DG GROW of the European Commission. Professor Dr. Johan Stiens is head of department and director of the Biomedical Engineering, Electronics and Information Department at VUB, a Brussels-based university. Cédric de Meeûs is vice president for Group Public Affairs and Government Relations at LafargeHolcim, a Swiss multinational company that manufactures building materials. Then we have Benjamin Strandquist, a senior advisor on electrification at Bellona Foundation. His work focuses on zero emissions construction sites and finally, Manal Rachdi, who is owner of OXO Architects. He will shed light on the conception and design aspects of the construction sustainability. Today's debate will follow the following structure. First, Fulvia will give us an overview of the renovation wave as it is planned by the European Commission within the Green Deal, and thereby set the frame for the conversation. After her presentation, we will have some time to take questions from the audience. Thereafter, each of the other panelists will present their work and how it speaks to the renovation wave in short presentations that are approximately 3 minutes long. And once these presentations are completed, we will again take questions from the audience and facilitate a conversation among the speakers. Before handing over to Fulvia, a few IT and operational details. You can see on your right-hand side the chat function, and above the field where you actually enter the question, you can see event and session. Please use session if you pose your question, because event will be across the whole event, and session is actually in this conversation. If you do have questions for the speakers, please note them in the session chat, and I will review the questions and post them to the audience, to the speakers, answer them if we have a lot. If you want to tweet about this event, the hashtag is IF2020. Feel free to tweet. The organizers are obviously pleased if you do so. If you have any other questions on IT or operational aspects, just type them into the chat as well, and we have a few people working backstage that will solve your issue as quickly as possible. If you do not speak, please put yourself on mute so that we don't have any background noise. And with that, I hand over to Fulvia Raffaelli.
Thank you, Luise, and good morning, everybody. Thank you for the invitation and actually for identifying the renovation wave as one of the main issues for discussion today. I think it does deserve a lot of attention from all of us. Well, let me start with some numbers concerning our building stocks. The construction is a major consumer of natural resources, with 50% of the extract materials going to the sector and 30% of the waste generated by it. Buildings also account for 40% of energy consumed, and in most of the EU countries, half of the residential stocks was built before the first thermal regulations were introduced in the 70s. And at the same time, 50 million of EU consumers struggle to keep their home adequately warm. So against such a background, it is clear that the current renovation rate of the building stock that varies from 0.4 to 1.2% in the member states will not be sufficient to redress the situation, and will need at least to double that rate to reach the EU energy efficiency and climate objectives. The message was clear already in the first set of political guidance of the President von der Leyen, and was then even clearer in the context of the Green Deal. We need to invest in our building stocks to allow the transition towards an efficient, circular and fair society. The COVID-19 crisis made even more important to work on the building stock and on the construction sector, as this is one of the sectors that has been most affected in terms of job losses and declining on construction activities. So two complementary reasons to work on the building stocks. First of all, doubling the renovation rate of existing buildings to reach climate neutrality by 2050, as announced into the Green Deal, and investing in a deep renovation of the existing building stocks, and more generally in the modernization or the decarbonation of the built environment, will inject much needed stimulus and help the construction ecosystem to bounce back stronger, greener, more digital and more resilient. So to achieve this double objective, the Commission services are working quite intensively at this point in time on the flagship initiative on the Renovation Wave, which is foreseen for adoption mid-October. At this point of time, as many proposals of the action plan are still under discussion, not least because of the financial implications and the budgetary orientations defined by the European Council in the meeting in July. So, unfortunately, I will not be able to give you many details about the initiative, but I can confirm that this will be a very comprehensive strategy touching upon investments, technical assistance, innovation and digitalization, skilling and reskilling of workers, and will integrate a life cycle approach via stronger links with the Levels project initiative. The ambitious Next Generation EU Recovery Package and the strengthened multi-annual financial framework proposed by the Commission the 27 May 2020 provide financial firepower to Member States. And the Renovation Wave strategy will inter alia set out how part of those funds, together with the national private funds, can be used effectively to send the renovation wave across the continent. All this is very ambitious and will require a lot of coordination efforts at all levels. Well, first of all, within the Commission services, and this is what we try by working very, very close with the colleagues in DG NR, DG Environment, DG ECFIN, DG Employment, and many others. Within Member States, of course, as many cases, the building and construction responsibilities are not centralized, but decentralized at regional and even very local level. So that will require a lot of coordination within the Member States. And this, of course, will build up on their experiences into the drafting of the National Energy and Climate Plan, where the issues of renovation was already profoundly addressed. It will also require a lot of coordination between private, public, and public investors, big and small companies, as the project will be very, very different from each other, from big renovation of public buildings to small private projects. And this will need to be coordinated and managed very, very closely from national, regional, local, and European level. So this I think it was for me to set the background and setting the scene for the discussion to come. I know you're going to be disappointed because of the lack of details on the Renovation Wave, but I hope you can also understand that these are we are really finalizing the document, and I would not be in the position to give more specific details on that. Thank you for your understanding and looking forward to your questions and interventions.
Thank you very much, Fulvia. We already have a question in the chat, which says that the numbers differ widely. The author of the post said, I just heard you say the rate is between 0.4 and 1.2 per anno. Can you share the source of these numbers with us? As a second question, how can the Commission ensure significant amounts of renovation and not only cosmetic ones are undertaken?
Yes, the data comes from the building observatory stock of DGNR. These are the numbers I found it there. And basically, which is an existing, now long-standing observatory. And it's true that the numbers differ very much because the definition of renovation also different from one member state to the other. So there are more cosmetic renovation, indeed, to change the color of your facade, and more in-depth renovation that are not, let's say, counted in the same way across the member states. But this is their range, so we're not, even if numbers would be fair, it would not be, the order of magnitude, let's say, is not very different. It's true that this is a challenge, how to ensure that we don't finance only cosmetic renovation, but really in-depth renovation. And this is will be done in close cooperation with the stakeholders and the authorities involved. Of course, the coordination with the member states is crucial there, as they are responsible for construction works all around. We are identifying technical assistance, so really providing support to the authorities as one of the main areas to work and to set up let's say, a service coordination between European and national level as one of the main entry point to really be sure that when identifying and defining the projects and giving the indication for the financial investment, we will also be able to capture what we want to capture. So in-depth renovation, looking at the same time to the energy efficiency, but also more broadly to the modernization of the building stocks altogether, including a certain integration of the life cycle assessment of the buildings in a proportionate way, of course.
Thank you very much. Come to the other presentations. Do the other speakers have questions for Fulvia that relate to her summary of where they stand? Not at the moment? Okay, perhaps it will then come once we have heard more. We can then go back and start the conversation. If that's the case, then I would hand over to Johan for his summary of his work and how it relates to the Renovation Wave. Thank you very much.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. So we heard about the dazzling number of energy which is lost in buildings, yes. And especially that we know that so many houses have been constructed a long time ago when the regulations were minor. So I'm a professor, so I like calculating, and so I calculated that we consume 1 petawatt hour of energy every year, 1 petawatt hour. So you can calculate how much energy, how much it costs to the European Union, to the people. Now, you see, it is a very big task. So you have to be very rational how to tackle the task. And so my background is sensing, so from electronics and informatics, so data science. So for me, it looks very reasonable that you make a very automated map of where are the biggest needs. Because you have to make real good choices, because you can start with the best houses to renovate, but actually you have to start with the houses in the worst conditions. But which are these houses? How can you quantify this? And that's why from the electronics and from an electronics department background, we are looking to sensors to automate the quantification of the energy performance of buildings. And of course, you can't do it alone. You need with many different stakeholders to tackle this on a large scale. Sensors, automation, and then to put it in a database in the countries, in the different countries of Europe. And then you can make very rational decisions which houses to tackle first. I'm going to end with one simple calculation. So if we start today with one house, yes, it will cost us some budget. Next year, we do another house, but the house that we renovated last year will also gain in energy, yes? So then we have already 3 years of energy gain. Then in the third year, another house. If you start calculating, after 3 years, 6 years of energy. After 4, you have 10 years of energy. So if you do this, this is a quadratic rule. So we have to accelerate in the beginning because it's a quadratic dependence on the number of years that we can gain energy of a certain house. And with this respective, I would like to stop that my presentation, and that we have to really invest in automation of the measurements and the automation of the data performance to have a very good overview and rational decisions in this area.
Very much, Johan. Can I ask the others, how was the sound quality for you now? Was that just my speaker?
No, it's good.
Okay.
It was good.
Okay.
I had a little echo. So let's just all make sure to mute. Maybe that's where it came from. Good. And then I would like to hand over. I'm having real sound difficulties here. I have a lot of cracking. I would like to hand over to Cédric for his 3-minute presentation. Dear audience, if you have any questions, please note them down and feel free to chat. We will speak.
Good. Okay. I will go on. I hope the mic is working, and if there's a sound problem, please do make a signal. So I would like to make 4 points, if I may, and the first 2 would be ideas to Fulvia. We're still busy finalizing the renovation wave. The first one concerns the scope of the renovation wave, which, as it stands, it very much focuses on the building stock. However, those buildings are part of a broader, larger built environment ecosystem, which is, I think, advancing fast in terms of its evolving needs, in terms of mobility, in terms of housing needs, in terms of what housing needs to respond to, in terms of waste management of household. In Brussels, for example, we separate a lot of waste, and so on and so forth. And I'm wondering if the renovation wave is not an opportunity to look a bit broader than purely housing, but also enable or incentivizing a broader urban renovation wave in which sits the building, but not looking solely at the building. That's the first one. The second one is also a suggestion in terms of scope. We're talking much of renovation, or I believe what we also put on a term retrofit. As we've heard from you and from Johan, the building stock in Europe is very old, and it's not just a question of occupation. I think the best demonstration we've had was with the COVID crisis. Suddenly, someone's flat or house became the classroom, the gym, the recreational place, as well as the normal housing facilities that we're used to. So the social needs of habitations, of housing evolves, and sometimes what we have does not correspond to what we need today. And I think we'll have to make tough choices. And sometimes deconstruction and reconstruction also is part of renovation, so that we adapt the built environment to what we need today. And we have, I see Manal, who's based in Paris. We were involved in the deconstruction and reconstruction of a historic building in the center of Paris, where we reuse 100% of the deconstruction material. So it is possible, but it requires innovation and willingness and funding, because of course it's more expensive. A third point I would like to make is and that's more I'm wearing my hat of a material manufacturer, and as surprised as it may sound, is it a materials agenda? And I would say no, it's not a materials agenda. It's a performance agenda. And I think many of the actors along the very fragmented value chain still struggle to embed metrics such as carbon performance. What does a building aligned to 1.5 degrees trajectory looks like? How do we define it? And we're still struggling to provide across all of the different actors harmonized data that is meaningful for someone like Johan, who measures the performance of buildings, or Manal, who is an architect and conceptualizes buildings and needs to have comparable information from different material providers or solution providers that have the same function to make the right choices. And of course, the choices you will make if you're in northern Finland or in Brussels or in Portugal will not be the same. And the last point I would like to make is the concept of life cycle assessment, which is, you've mentioned it, Fulvia, it's going to be the basis, the underlying basis of the renovation wave, and that's very welcomed. And I hope it's not going to lead to one thing. It's to compare two things against each other. And what I always use as an example is, if you take a single glazing window from turn of the century with hand-blown glass, and you take a triple insulating window that you use today, the triple insulating window is much more carbonated because it has more material and it's more carbonated. But we're not going to go back to single glazing. So life cycle assessment in terms of buildings and renovation needs to consider the final product, if you want, the building. And we should not start comparing, let's say, a cubic meter of concrete with a cubic meter of wood. It needs to be embedded, and it needs to be based on the life cycle performance of the building itself. And if we manage to do that in the renovation wave and the guidance that you provide to the construction value chain in Europe, then we can really make a big step forward. Luise, I could continue for 15 minutes, but I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Cédric. Apologies from my side for the technical troubles. I hope my sound is better now. If that's the case, I would like to continue with the speakers, and then we can have a conversation afterwards. Benjamin, are you ready to give your presentation?
I guess I am. And the sound was good for the last couple of minutes there, so I hope it's still okay. So as urbanization happens and populations grow and cities keep expanding, we're very keen on having that growth happen in the most sustainable way possible, obviously. And construction sites are vital in that regard, because regardless of if you're renovating an existing building or building a new one using recycled materials, it will be vital how you do that. So if you take Oslo as an example, 8% of the city's CO2 emissions come from construction, and then you can add local air pollution in addition to that. Construction sites today are to a very little extent electrified. Most of the equipment you see will run on diesel. And if you just look at a construction site, especially one in the city, it just makes sense to electrify it, because the electricity is right there. It's in the ground, it's never far away. You just need to plan the connection and make the connection to the grid. Now, city councils are huge buyers of construction, and we believe that public procurement is the right place to start if you want to achieve zero-emission construction sites. You can put environmental criteria in public tenders, and that will create a market for zero-emission construction equipment and push key players like manufacturers, contractors, and so on towards a green shift. In Oslo, we contributed to what became the world's first zero-emissions construction site, which was a public street renovation project. And Oslo has now set a target that they will only accept zero-emissions machinery on all construction sites entirely by 2025. And the market is responding, because if they fail to comply with these standards in the future, that will mean that they will miss out on huge projects. If you already bought electric machinery for your public construction projects, then you would like to use that machinery in your other private sector construction as well. Now, it is more expensive to buy electric excavators, for example, but they will recover that cost because of lower operating costs and maintenance costs during the lifespan. And as demand is driven up, the costs will fall and the financial benefit will increase. However, it is likely that you will need an element of public funding to get the ball rolling to begin with. Now, when I say zero emissions, I should probably give that a little explanation. Life cycle emissions for an electric piece of construction equipment is about 40% lower if you use the current OECD average electricity mix. And once the share of renewables goes up, that benefit will only increase. So at Bellona, we're working through the Big Buyers Initiative together with several major European cities to set joint zero-emission construction site targets to try to make more sites happen and eventually, hopefully, inspire other cities and make electric machinery the new mainstream. Thank you.
Thank you, Benjamin. And with this, I hand over to Manal for his 3-minute presentation. And after that, Fulvia, if you could respond to what you have heard by the other speakers afterwards, that would be fantastic. You're on mute. You need to unmute yourself.
Yes. Oh, thank you. As architect, we conceive the of the future. So we have all this issue that we need to work with and at the right scale. In the beginning, when we building about the future carbon footprint. So it's divided in 3.
Manal, sorry, can you try to use a different speaker? I think there's quite a bit of noise coming through.
Oh.
Or there's also a little exclamation mark next to your sound. Maybe you can try to shift things.
Is it working more now?
Yeah. Otherwise, we just have to deal with it.
Okay, I have different microphone. So I was saying 3 different stage of how we create building. The first is the how we conceive but when we are in the strategy of redefining an existing building, this part is not existing, but the building site and the life of the building and usage of how the building operates. So when we recreate and we change and refurbish existing building, we could cut by half all the carbon footprint. So it's important to understand that all the building cannot be them. We have to care about some of the DNA on every building. Sometimes some buildings are created to be able to stand for 50 to 100. It's much more interesting, and we can see from the beginning a resilient building that could change. Others to transform. So this part of the building, we have to tear them apart and start over again, as saying. But we're using the same, trying to use all the material in either in the building itself or other building. But the to be able to be controlled, and this is what Johan was talking about, is very important to manage for a big city. What's the right size? It's very important to understand what's the right size to control the carbon footprint. Is it, I would say, a block? Is it a district? Is it a city? How we can start managing and having like a really clear view is producing as a carbon footprint. If we today working everyone in different part of the city, trying most efficient building and transform it. That's the existing part of the building, and the other part of the city that it's much more consuming and much air. Another view of a city and having the ability to control every part of it and having real instead of just trying to create the most efficient in every new building or every new refurbishment. It probably solve this carbon emission over Europe and starting from the right size. I don't know today what's the right size. Is it the building? A comprehension of what we're gonna produce and how we can control it in the main future.
Yes, I see there were some questions that related to Johan that we can then build upon. Is everybody on mute besides Miss Fulvia Raffaelli? Okay. Fulvia, could you share your responses to what you just heard?
Yes, thank you, Luise. Thank you to the intervenants for the ideas. Many of these ideas are indeed taken up into the renovation wave. Let me start from your call to enhance the digitalization and the use of smart applications, smart sensors, and different ways of improving. This is definitely understood and clearly integrated into the renovation wave, where you will see there will be a number of actions pushing, let's say, trying to improve, first of all, the use of the BIM, making that the finally the main application to be used in terms of public procurement. We'll have also action in terms of improving and accelerating the permitting of also, or in terms of the national scale, because of course renovation is nice. Accelerating the rate of renovation is a nice concept, but then you need to face also the reality, which is getting the permission to enter into your renovation, and that's in many cases requires a lot of time at national, regional level, and the involvement of several authorities and a lot of paperwork still. So this is also an area that where we would like to work with the member states with a view to accelerate that procedure and to digitalize more the information flows. Here I think there is a big challenges that is the one has been mentioned from many of you about facilitating the flow of information from the material side to the buildings and even to the broader prospect. And then you mentioned that the size is an issue. We've been working a lot on that, and we think that this is ensuring consistency of the information across the whole life cycle is essential, really, to create and to provide a situation where you can take informed decisions on what the best solution is for a certain buildings, but also for a district or a cities altogether. We need more information, and we need more coherent information that you can mobilize across the site. So we started already working, of course, on indicators, and well, Cédric knows very well of the experiences under the PEF project, together with the colleagues in DG Environment for the declaration of environmental performances. We do have also levels, which is the project again managed together with the colleagues in DG Environment about the sustainability criteria for buildings, and you certainly know really trying to connect these two dimensions. So to ensure that indicators that we would develop today at the material stage can be vehiculated and used when going at the building, and then possibly afterwards at the district, so that we also maximize the use of information there. And we don't need to reinvent the wheel every time at the different stages. This is something that is particularly, we are particularly attached to in DG Grow, working also, of course, on the construction side, but also in broader terms on the sustainability of product. So on the same concept of really ensuring the transparency and facilitating the comparability of the materials, but even more to really allow informed decision making. I agree that we should not compare wood with cement in an abstract term, but really by providing the information about the environmental performance, CO2 in big, but also more in general terms. It could also be emissions of hazardous substances or whatever. It needs to be, this information must be at the disposal of the architect or the engineer later on when taking the most informed decision in terms of the specific project is working on. Because in abstract terms, it's very, very difficult and not so really useful to compare to compare materials in abstract. So a life cycle analysis means really pooling all this information and looking, applying the concept to a specific areas. We need also digitalization indeed to simplify, so to make this process not too burdensome and not too complex, in particular for SMEs that are actually bigger players into the construction areas, because this is, we know that there are already very good examples of implementing life cycle assessment in big companies. Like that, moving that at small scale is much more difficult. So again, this is something on which we try really to work on how to standardize this information and how to make the information more easy to be performed and used across the life cycle. It's true that there are Renovation Wave will be mostly about the existing building stocks, but we shouldn't forget, of course, the new, and we shouldn't forget either the ones that will not be renovated later on. So maybe it will be deconstructed or demolished because that's the right decision to take. So this is certainly included. I also wanted to react on the fact that there is a broader perspective. So even if the Renovation Wave is focusing on buildings, then there is a broader perspective, which is the built environment, where all this needs to make sense. And you certainly know that there is also another initiative, which is announced in the context of the Circular Economy Action Plan on sustainable built environment that would probably take almost a broader perspective. But of course, let's say the Renovation Wave is a first step, is an action plan, will include many operational activities, and will then be afterwards complemented by the other initiatives with a broader scope. But what I wanted to say is that many of the principles that we wanted to deal with the sustainable built environment, in particular the life cycle assessment, but also the need to incorporate circular thinking in renovation, so not focusing only on energy performances, but also more in general terms on environmental footprint, has been already incorporated into the renovation wave, and this is something that we welcome very much, as we would have been a bit, let's say, hesitant in supporting an action only for focusing on energy efficiency, because that would have given, I think, from my perspective, the wrong signal to the sector altogether. And to the needs also, because it has been mentioned also that it's true that actually the buildings that requires more renovations are not the newest and are not the bigger. In many cases, the worst performing buildings are in the poorest areas of the cities and in the most delocalized areas in the countryside, etc. So the mapping of those situations is essential. That's why I said at the beginning we would need a very strong interaction with the local and regional authorities, because of course, sensors are very useful, but before we will be able to use the sensors to identify the worst performing cases, I think local authorities, often social security systems, could certainly be good also in guiding us towards that dimension. It is important, and that's also why, together with the colleagues in DG Grow, we're also working on an initiative that would particularly focus on the social housing. Not only because this is a big area with a lot of public and private investments, but also because indeed of the social dimension that would inquire. As I said at the beginning, the transition has to be fair and comprehensive, and this is essential. So.
Thank you very much, Fulvia. What I'm hearing are a few themes that seem to be popping up over and over. The term life cycle analysis and standards has been mentioned. The ecosystem and circular economy has been mentioned. Finance is obviously a big theme. And the question that I would like to pose to the audience is whether there is to the audience as a whole is, should there be a different approach for the buildings that are owned by private individuals versus buildings that are owned by the public bodies, and what does that imply? Public buildings obviously can be renovated much faster than private ones. You have different ownership structures, and also when attracting finance, it might be different. So I'd like to hear the panel on their thoughts. Perhaps, Cédric, you can start off.
Yeah, I've unmuted myself. It's not an easy question for me to answer. I think the approach that was taken by the Commission in the context of the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive was probably the right one, where they requested the member states to draw out energy efficiency action plans in the built environment, starting with public buildings, where the public authorities and regional and local authorities have a lot more leverage to incentivize certain the use of certain technologies, of certain performances in their own public procurement, whereas imposing let's say a procurement standard among private actors and private owners is much more complicated. So I think by starting with let's say a large scale push in public building is probably an efficient way forward to create exemplary projects across Europe, and to create also demand for innovations which are available today on the market but not used at any scale at all. And if I look inside our own companies, we've launched across several European countries carbon neutral concrete, but it remains, we believe there is a growing market, but it remains very niche. And the biggest lever to help rolling out much more of those solutions, one of the tools is through public procurement, and they're starting with public buildings as an efficient way forward.
Manal or Johan, I don't want to force you to a statement, but if you have any views on that question, I would be keen to hear your thoughts.
I could say that for us as architect, and I have for the last 10 years, it's much more easier to work with the public building and transformation for public building, but it's for everyone to reduce the carbon footprint. So also the private building should be able to be transformed to reduce. I agree with Cédric that it's much more easier to work with public if there is a goal, if there is a target to reduce. For the private sector, it's a hope that we can go toward a very hard reduction for the carbon footprints in the future and their future building. I'm talking about like private sector, but small private owner, it's much more difficult. But that's why the EU help of the EU for this refurb. France had said that the President of France, Macron, said that there is 7 billion for the renovation of housing. So probably this could help and will help the transformation of the private and small private owner to their housing to be much more efficient in the future. So both, I think it's probably the same same goal.
I see we still have problems with the sound, unfortunately. Johan and Benjamin, do you have any views on this part of the question? Johan, do you want to go first? Mute yourself, though.
Yes, public is easier, but of course, well, we have to find funding solutions. So I think it's important to look to the value of renovation. So what is the gain over a period of 10 years, and therefore you can give financial aid support to the private sector, but they pay it back. I mean, it can be a kind of loan, it can be a kind of financial support. I think that we can be very very innovative in ways to deal with this. But an important factor in this is you have to calculate what is the return on this investment. And that's why in the very beginning of my presentation, so I made a few tables where you see petawatt hour of energy, yes? And so if you have a renovation of 0.7% of the houses or 0.8%, you can easily calculate how much we gain. So I think that we have to make this kind of calculation on a district scale, so that everybody comes together. And of course, public is public, and private gets a part of the public advantages, but not fully. I think that you can really calculate on the return on investment.
Thank you. Benjamin, I think you work mostly with the public sector, correct?
Absolutely, yes.
How?
Yeah, so we believe absolutely, and pretty much what everybody else has said, that the public sector is the right place to start for innovation in this field. And the public sector is a good testing ground for new methods, new technologies. And so our approach is that we take those best practices that we develop in collaboration with the public sector, and eventually we can turn some of that into standards that also the private sector has to adhere to, and then the financing will differ depending on what kinds of private projects you're talking about. If there can be relevant government funding that you can apply for, stuff like that. It depends, how private a project is and what scale it is and what type of renovation project it is. So it's hard to say something general when it comes to that. But yeah, the public sector is the laboratory, and then the best stuff is supposed to trickle down to the private sector.
May I have some comment or idea or remark, whatever you call it? So in the public sector, it could be also very interesting to organize living labs. So that so in the Brussels region, we are going to submit tomorrow, we are going to put all the signatures for a project which is called Be Deep. It means deep renovation. It has different definition, 25% of, above 25% of the value or something like that is deep renovation. And so we are going to work with a living lab. So we select 2 or 3 kinds of buildings, a university building, a very tall building of 25 levels, and then another building. So it allows to bring different technologies. We don't have to select today which technologies we are going to run the next 20 years, but I mean, in a living lab, we can bring these different technologies together, materials, sensor sites, and digitalization and so on. So the last remark that I have is like, where is the bottleneck? I mean, we have now an average of 0.7% renovation a year in Europe. So if we want to accelerate to 1.5, double, to 2%. So it would be very interesting to know where is the bottleneck. So do we have enough educated people?
Well, I play this back to the panel. Anybody that is keen to answer that question?
Is there enough educated personnel, high tech in this?
Sorry, can I come back also on the public-private, let's say, conversation we just had? I of course, I agree with what all you said, dear panelists. Yes, the public is certainly a big laboratory. It's easy to address, although of course there is also a lot of information and a lot of training into the public procurers areas where we need to do, because as far as they continue to pursue only the lower costs in this when drafting the public procurement, then we're not gonna receive much support, let's say, for the ambition. So we need really to align policies dealing with construction with macro policies, also looking at the spending of the creation of the spending of the national financing. So that's not so easy, although it's much easier, but it's not so easy to work with the public sector in that areas. But I agree that the focus should be first on the public buildings, also like hospitals, schools, and several areas like that. Now, it is important also to work on with the private, and that where I said at the beginning that one of the areas we want to work on is to build up a more consistent and more efficient system of technical assistance to be provided to the member states and to the authorities, building, of course, on ELENA, which is existing system to really help authorities to pull together micro projects in creating a project that would be, let's say, scalable and financeable, but more interesting also for bigger investors. Because I think that that's where it is in the private, in dealing with the private households, where we could really make the difference also for the many thousands and millions of citizens or EU citizens. It is important really that we align the politics in terms of educating the authorities to the spending, in their spending, and that's where the recovery funds is an important, very important element in the picture of the renovation wave, because we need to convince member states to channel the money that will come from the EU Next Generation into projects that make sense. And that's why also we rather prefer to speak about really using that money not to come back to the past, not only to fill the gaps and that have been created by the COVID, but really looking forward and taking that as an opportunity to address the challenges. And there's a lot of education, a lot of pedagogy to be made with the member states, with the local authorities, with the citizens themselves. And it's important that this message is percolated at all level. I wanted now
Fulvia,
yes.
We have actually 4 minutes left, so
Please.
Maybe let's. And I last question actually, Cédric, you still wanted to respond to Johan's question on where the bottleneck is, I believe. You were just starting to say
yes,
something.
bottlenecks, there are many, but I would say that at this stage, probably the bigger one is investment. Is really to try to find the right channels to direct the money, because that's where the big bottlenecks is. At least from my perspective, is to really create the conditions to restore the market and to create the conditions for both public and private to invest into those projects.
Cédric, were you still going to say something?
No, go ahead with the rest of the questions.
Basically, my last question to the panel, and we need to end soon, is 1 minute each, your idea for the green transition of Europe in light of COVID recovery and the Green New Deal. One minute per person. Let's start with Benjamin.
So then I'm going to step back to the construction phase of things. Whenever you're constructing something new out of recycled materials, set some clear targets for when you want construction to be zero emissions, because that sector will inevitably have to decarbonize. And it is possible to turn most of the machinery into electric machinery. So just set the targets, collaborate with, this is a message to all the cities out there. So set the targets, collaborate with manufacturers, attend big buyers initiative meetings, C40 mayors summits, keep track of developments, and you can make that happen. And it will greatly improve the carbon footprint of the city and direct air pollution as well.
Thank you. Johan. Again, you need to unmute yourself.
Sorry, so as we are active in electronics and informatics, so for me is the digitalization is very important, and we are in contact with the organizations in Belgium which are representative for the people who do all the measurements, yes, for the energy.
1 minute. 1 minute.
Yes, for the energy performance. And I see that there is still a lot of manual. You look to a page, to an invoice, and I think that we really have to change the trend in digitalization with very nice sensors.
Okay, thank you. Cédric, would you like to go next?
Yes, thank you. I would like to link what Fulvia is doing with what her colleagues at DG Klima are doing, and that is basically we're all collectively aiming to reach at net zero construction. That will require the use of lots of innovations, some of which are starting to trickle now on the market. Carbon neutral solution and soon net zero construction solutions. I'm convinced that that will require somehow carbon pricing, some form of carbon pricing. And the question is, and I don't have the answer, but can we have carbon pricing mechanism evolve from the current focus, which is on emissions, which needs to continue, to embed consumption, to incentivize and reward the use of climate neutral or net zero solutions, which are more expensive today. Thank you.
Thank you. Very important point there. Manal, your video doesn't seem to work, at least for me. Are you still there? And would you like to pitch you're on mute as well?
Just to be able to speak, otherwise it doesn't in the video. What probably I would say is that we should not be discussing zero emission or zero net carbon Europe. It should be like mandatory for the next 10 years. It should be something that we are obliged all the cities of Europe to be zero emission for their future building, and to be able to start talking about a smart city that's zero emission. We should have the right scale to calculate the carbon footprint. So it's an open discussion, but probably as the industry of transportation made their a revolution with the cars. The right scale probably is the building. So if we be able to reduce as maximum as possible the emission of each building, existing and future building, probably we could control the net emission of the entire Europe.
And can you mute yourself again, please? Thank you. Fulvia, your perhaps personal big idea for the transition of the European buildings.
You know what? I think I hope that the transition will remain human-centric. You know, that the people will really remain at the center of this transition. The people that lives in the houses and in the buildings, the people that works in the manufacturing center, that producing the products, the people that actually design the future, or the architects or the engineers that design the renovation and the future buildings, really establishing a long, strong dialogue across the supply chain. Of course, digital means will help that dialogue and will better. But I think it's important that we keep a strong focus on the people, and we never forget that this is that the transition will need to be beneficial for the environment, but also indirectly, but even so for the environment, but indirectly also for the humans that are living on the planet. So, and that's I think is I really wish that we will be able to keep that focus across all our policies. The one on the construction and the buildings is particularly close, let's say, to the life of our citizens and of all of us. And we're spending a big amount of time within buildings, so we are directly affected. And I think that this is has to remain a central point of references, including and even that are let's say on the having the lower incomes and the households that cannot really have with those renovations. So we have the obligations and the responsibility of thinking about the transition for the whole society, and not only for the ones that can afford. I think it is. I hope this is going to remain central in the reflection of the Commission altogether, but also of each one of us.
Thank you very much. So we're coming to the end of this debate. I personally feel that we've touched upon many interesting themes, from the living lab to carbon pricing to CO2-free machinery and being inclusive in this transition. I would like to thank the speakers very much for taking the time to prepare for this debate and to actually be present. Your input and expertise was greatly appreciated. Thank you very much. Somebody is again on mute. This session was recorded, and I guess it will be shared afterwards. I would also like to thank OPP for organizing the festival, and I wish you a wonderful remaining afternoon, maybe as part of this Ideas Festival. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye. Thank you.